After the exercise and our children, it's been fantastic. They've been looked after. So finally, we want to look then at Nehemiah leading God's people. And really what I want to do is go through the book again, and particularly look at the challenges. We briefly went through those. There was 12. And they came from externally, from the people around, and also internally from his own countrymen. To look at those challenges, but more importantly, when we consider the challenges, to consider the solutions. What did he do? And I've put those challenges, hopefully, in words that you will be able to quickly translate that to our day and age. So the idea is that, as we're going through this, it's in terms that you'll be able to say, yeah, I can see that applying straight away. And you might be able to think of things in your life or your ecclesial life or your family life that straight away that hits home. And there's the power of the message. So we want to look at Nehemiah as a leader, as a godly leader, which is a key theme of the book of Nehemiah. How he deals with those who tried to stop the building of the wall. That was their aim, was to stop the building of that wall. Yes, it was probably economic in the sense as soon as Jerusalem had a wall and trade might go through there no longer be Samaria and their area. So therefore it's that idea, but it's also because of the strength of the Jews, and they knew that wall of separation would help that. And they kept trying to find ways to prevent God's will to be done. And then we want to look at the internal challenges. Those that sought to give up. Those that sought compromise. Those that sought friendship with the locals, rather than standing firm and being separate, as we considered in our second study. And therefore we need to apply the lessons, the principles to our time and age, really, brothers and sisters. We've been talking this afternoon, haven't we? Dealing with those challenges that are coming, both from without and within, to the separation we have, to the things of God as revealed in the Word of God, and to separate ourselves from the world and its thinking. So, hopefully. So we're looking at external challenges to leading God's people and solutions. Every slide will be like this. The solution is in, obviously, the orange. First one we want to look at is, then there was a deep resentment, was the challenge that we have in chapter 2, made by those who are around. We're introduced to some of those that oppose against them. And then we have what he does as a response. So hopefully you've got Nehemiah open. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 10. This is the reaction when he comes from Persia with a letter that he can use the king's forest to rebuild the walls. And this is the first thing we hear about the reaction of those around. So verse 10, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly. There was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. That's the reaction to the locals. It grieved them exceedingly. The NKJ said they were deeply disturbed. The status quo, the situation was now being changed. As an individual come from Persia, from the king, with his blessing. That there was now a man to seek the welfare of the Jews. There's this anti-Semitic reaction, isn't it? It grieved them exceedingly. Nehemiah was the man that had come to change that situation as it was, so the well-being of Israel was improved. And the reaction to that, of them being grieved, we see that he just carries out the private assessment, doesn't he? In verse 11, he takes no notice of that, whether he knows of it, I'm not sure, but it's in his writings here, so obviously that would have been fed to him. It would have come to his attention. In chapter 2, verse 12 through to verse 16, he does that private assessment of the walls. He comes to Jerusalem in verse 11, and then as we read, he goes at night and he goes around and he looks at the situation. He looks at the gates, verse 13, you can see the walls are broken down. He goes right round, he sees in verse 14, he can't ride there for the beast because there's so much rubble. He sees the magnitude of the task, basically. But he goes at night and he keeps the survey a secret in verse 16. The rulers didn't know about it. He didn't go, well, let's all go and have a look at the wall together, because then he'd have the reaction of all the others to the task. He's seen the issue. He's been given the blessing by God to deal with it, and he's gone and assessed it himself. There's times where we have to assess a situation ourselves. Sometimes rather involving others might distract from what the true assessment of the situation is. And that's why he did here. He did a private assessment of the task. What is needed here? He did it quietly, he did it with one or two, and they didn't know about it. The next challenge he had was that open ridicule by a group of individuals, wasn't it? Chapter 2, verse 19, we read of it earlier, or referred to it. But when Sanballat, this is when he told them, let's write, in verse 18, they're going to rise up and build, so they strengthen their hands for the good work. So they're starting to do the rebuilding of the walls, the majority of it. But when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem, there's another here now, the Arabian, heard of it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing that ye do? Will you rebel against the king? So there's an open ridicule by a group here in verse 19, isn't there, yeah? Geshem now has joined them, the Arabian. So it's amazing, we know just with Christ that in opposing the truth, people will come together that wouldn't normally be together or hadn't associated before. And they laugh, they mock, don't they? And they also raise the issue of loyalty. Notice that at the end there. Will you rebel against the king? You see, they'd used that before, that had stopped the work continuing. And so they use that strategy again. They're saying, oh, you're going to rebel against the king by doing this. They question the motives of the individual of this work now on the walls. And not only did they question it, but they're also inferring something. I think you can see that by the answer. Let's look at verse 20, what the answer is, and then see how we can get there. How that it is an exclusive service. This is not going to be shared, this rebuilding. Verse 20. Then answered I them and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. The implication being, aren't you going to rebel? Well, if you're not going to rebel, then you're going to include us in the work, aren't you? You're not going to be exclusive about this. You're going to accommodate us. We're going to be involved with work. We'll do it together. That's why Nehemiah gives that reaction. Did you notice in verse 20, there's three things that he tells. No portion, you're not going to have any share in this. No right, no claim to this Jerusalem and the rebuilding of it, and no memorial, no remembrance in Jerusalem. You're going to be we're going to separate. This is for us, the Jews, not for you. And so you can see how that idea of, will you rebel against the king? So, sublimely, the message was that, if you're going to do this, you better include us. And he says, no, we're not going to include you. This is for us. This is not for you. You have no right, no memorial, no claim. This is God's city. This is the God of Israel's city. Not yours not to be shared with you, unbelievers. So he does an open declaration of trust, doesn't he? The God of heaven, he will prosper us. He declares that openly as a leader, and the others follow him, and he rebukes their laughing, their scorning of the task that they did. He declares his confidence that they will build the walls. He instills confidence in those that follow, and therefore they continue to build the wall. And then there's an open challenge to their ability to do the task. We read it, didn't we, right at the beginning of the day, seems a long time ago. But in chapter 4, when the war keeps going, when the mocking hasn't stopped the progress, we see in verse 2 and 3, we see in verse 1 that Sanballat is very angry when he sees the walls building. This mocking, this sort of despising is now turning to wrath, to anger. It's getting stronger. Verse 2, he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria, this is Sanballat, and said, what do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? So he's saying, look, is it really going to be possible they're going to build this wall again? Is it really going to be accomplished? In great indignation before his army of Samaria, before his brethren. He's really raising the stakes now, isn't he? Openly ridiculed them, but now he's saying, he's questioning their ability to do the task. We saw it earlier, didn't we, how that when it was achieved, how they lost face. You can understand here he is declaring that these Jews can't possibly do this before his army and before his brethren. And verse 3, we see how Tobiah joins in and says, if a fox go up, he's going to break down their wall. So the idea is, it's so futile, their effort. If they do build a wall, it's hardly going to be strong. Foxes or a jackal, or that idea, it's going to knock it down. He ridicules their strength and ability. And Nehemiah hears this and we have that prayer in verse 4 and 5. It's where he takes it to God in prayer, doesn't he? Hear, O our God, for we are despised. He acknowledges that their building is before God, and he says, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them a prey in the land of captivity, and cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee. Why does he say that? For they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. It's not because he's got a personal vendetta against them, or indignation, but it's this idea that for they have provoked thee, the God of Israel, they've angered you. You are behind this project. We read that, didn't we, earlier on, that the good hand of my God was upon me. And therefore, in doing this and despising the builders, they were despising the God that had allowed that to occur, that worked behind the scenes, that was with Nehemiah, blessing him, the God of Israel. And therefore, that's why he says those words there. You know, it's not, as I say, a personal thing in that sense. Their words, this open challenge, demoralised the builders. Verse 5, it says, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders, and therefore it must have had an impact. But they carry on after that prayer. We built the wall, and it was joined halfway together, for the people had a mind to work. And so we see there, don't we, how clearly that Nehemiah took the issue to God in prayer. That insulted God, it was God's work. And therefore he took it to God and let God decide how that was going to work out. That he wanted their reproach that they'd had, the reproach on the God of Israel, to go back on them. And we see how the wall was joined together there, don't we, in verse 6. As we say, joined together. We find the opposition now grows when that happens. With verse 7. There's now a threat of attack. You know, we've got the wall now all joined together, seems of half height. You know, this progress is continuing, even though we've done an open challenge. Now we're going to have a threat. Verse 7 and 8. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdods, this group is growing, heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the preachers began to be stopped, then they were very wroth. The anger, the antagonism, the reaction is getting stronger, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. So we find these extra ones coming in, don't they? They conspire together to fight against Jerusalem, to hinder it, to stop it. They're going to use violence now to get their way. That's the idea, isn't it? The threat of attack on it. So what does Nehemiah do? He knows that, you know, this is a critical point in a sense. The wall's there, but we're going to probably be attacked now. Verse 9. Famous from Nehemiah, isn't it? Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. It does not say, brethren and sisters, we set a watch against them day and night because of them and made a prayer unto our God. Did you note the order? He prayed to his God first, and then he did what he could. I don't know about you, but so often I try to solve the problem, and then I might take it in prayer. Sometimes we don't take it in prayer first, and then try and solve the problem. And I don't think I'm alone, because human nature, we like to try and solve it ourselves or do what we can. And sometimes, really, every time we should take it to God first, shouldn't we? And then do what we can. That's what Nehemiah did here. He prayed, and then he set that watch. And that's a very powerful lesson I find for myself, and no doubt for yourselves as well. He did that was appropriate. Again, he sought God first. And so often, brothers and sisters, with our issues, with our problems, with that threatens to attack our family life, our ecclesial life, is that we try to solve it. We try to use the wisdom of this world. We try to use our own resources, our own strength, rather than taking it to God first in prayer and acknowledging his sphere of influence. The whole life is in his hands, and that he can manipulate, he can change circumstances, he can bring things about that will relieve us of that issue or help us with that issue. And that's a very powerful point, isn't it? Pray to God and takes appropriate action. He doesn't take appropriate action and not pray, but he prays first, and he does what he can. He set that watch against them, as we see in verse 9. And then, what challenge does he have? So, he has the challenge, as we know, the resolve of the workers due to the size of the task. God, there's so much rubbish, you know, there's dust everywhere, it's really hard for us. We can't resolve, you know. Enthusiasm when you start a project is easy, isn't it? When the going gets tough, then, you know, you've got to hang in there. That finds it difficult. Verse 10. And Judah said, the strength of the burden bearers of burdens is decayed. The strength of the burden bearers is failing, RSV. There's so much rubbish, we're not able to build the wall. You know, they've lost sight of the goal of building the wall. In the nitty-gritty of actually doing it, they've realised, they've seen the task as too big for themselves. They haven't appreciated the need of the cooperation, the fellowship, the strength that God was behind this. We're not able to build it. We should have finished. Why did we start this? We can't see it through. And then there's the threat of attack given to the workers. Verse 11 and 12. And for our adversaries, the enemies, they do not know, neither see, till we come in the midst of them and slay them and cause them the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came and said to us 10 times, so those that dwelt around Jerusalem that came in, they were being talked to by their adversaries that said 10 times, from all places whence you return unto us, they will be upon you. I think I used the word ambush in the earlier talk. Yeah, you go up to, we're going to attack you. So your strength is decayed from your actual labour force. Very strong challenges, isn't it? Yeah. How did he find solutions to this? Well, he did the following, didn't he? He encourages the leaders and the workers to trust in the Lord. That's where it all is. His trust is in God, hence him praying first. That's where his strength comes from. Yes, he's a great leader, and yes, he does practical things. But his strength of leadership comes from his trust in his God. Verse 13, you can see he sets in the lower behind the higher. He set them in families, which is with their swords. So there was some, thinking back to that previous point, there was something in it for them as individuals. They were protecting their families. Verse 14, I looked up and rose and said to the noble and the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses. Really clear language, isn't it? Yeah? Very powerful language. That the Lord would fight for them, that he would help them. He said, be not afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible. Reference back to Deuteronomy, and the idea is there of the God that would fight for them. He did wonderful things in Egypt. He'll do things for you. And secondly, he divides the workforce, doesn't he? In verse 16. Also, you can see verse 15 for yourself for time. You can read through that. Verse 16, and it came to pass from that time forth that half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half they held them both spears, shields, bows, and hambridges. And the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. So he divides, half are building and half are on standby to fight. So the building work continued, the workforce has been halved. He took that step to see that the building did continue, that was protected. He didn't say, well, we've got to stop building. He didn't say, we'll all protect ourselves. He allowed the work to continue. And they were ready to respond, weren't they, rapidly to any point of attack on the wall. And we note at the end of the verse how the house rulers, verse 16, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. There were the leaders that in verse 10 it said, it's too much for us here. They were actually the ones that were there as well, standing behind them, encouraging them, after Nehemiah had encouraged them to trust in the Lord. And then he reorganises things, doesn't he, as we see in verse 16 there. The delegation of duties and things, and provides protection. And overcoming that threat and overcoming the resolve of the workers. They keep going. It doesn't actually, as I can see it, take on that issue in verse 10. It's too much. By the fact that others just kept building, it indicated it wasn't too much. Yeah? I think there's a lesson there that he actually doesn't deal with it. Sometimes, as a leader, there's issues that come up, and sometimes it's best to leave it, and other things will solve that issue, doesn't it? The rest of the builders showed that it wasn't too much. The rest of them showed that it was possible to build the wall. And it didn't sap them. It actually, in the end, they overcame that issue. And so now they're there encouraging them. Who's enticed them, when they get the wall up, chapter 6, by them we see, verse 1, that he built the wall. There was no breach left. There's nowhere you could get in now. So if you wanted to do a sabotage attack or a surprise attack and things, then it seemed that that was less likely to happen. So now they changed their approach. They've tried ridicule, they've tried mocking, they've tried violence or the threat of it, and now we're going to try more subtle ways. And we're now going to home in on Nehemiah. We've tried to resolve the people, take the resolve of the people away from building, but they've continued. So now we're going to go for the head man. We sort him out, the thing will stop. So, chapter 6 then, verse 1, we can see they built the wall. It came to pass, this is the context, that there's no doors on the gates. Verse 2, then Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, come, let us meet together in one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me mischief. Okay, so there's no breach. So they've changed tactics. The opposition's changed tactics. Ridicule and threat, physical force had not succeeded. So now they're going to have this specific strategy aimed at the godly leadership of Nehemiah. Ono was at least a day's journey away. You can look at maps. Didn't put one up, but it's about a day's journey. So if you leave and you go back, that's 2 days out. If you're going to meet with them and talk with them, that's probably 3 days out, isn't it? Minimum. So 3 days away from the work. 3 days he's not there, sorting and helping and guiding the work of building the walls. You can see what their strategy was. That they wanted to end the building because it says, but they thought to do me mischief. Maybe they were trying to get him away from the protection of the Jews, of his own countrymen. Maybe then to expose him from that protection and therefore kill him. It would seem. They're not his friends, are they? They thought to do me mischief. And they do this more than once. We see that in verse 3. That they say, they sent messengers unto them saying, I'm doing a great work, I cannot come down. Why should the work cease? Why I leave it and come down to you? Verse 4, we're told that they do this 4 times. Oh, come and meet with us. Oh, come and have a chat. Why do you have to be so exclusive? You're working on that. Okay, the walls are doing really well. You don't need to keep going now, do you? The walls are half there. The walls are all built all the way around. Why do you need to, you can have a rest, a bit of relaxation. Hey, you've been working really hard. Let's take some time out, All these kind of phraseologies that we can hear in our own ecclesias. But he stays focused. He stays loyal, doesn't he? Verse 3, we read it. I am doing a great work, so I cannot come down. This was greater than him. This wasn't for him to have personal choice to dip in and dip out of. This was God's work. Why should I work cease while I leave it and come down to you? He saw the implication behind the offer. He was perceptive. If I do that, that leads to this and this consequence. And he saw what they were driving at. He saw what they were trying to do. He saw the implications of potential danger. And so verse 4, he answered them the same each time. They try once, try again, and again. And, they try to wear him down, don't they? Sometimes people won't take no for an answer or yes for an answer, and they just try again and try again and try again to see if you're going to change your answer, because, you might just buckle under the pressure. And that's what they're doing here, aren't they? Is he going to buckle under the pressure? Come on. But he doesn't. He stays focused. He stays loyal. And then there's the spreading of false claims. I think I put it as worse than that on the previous one, but chip to 6 and verse 5. This is a bit of propaganda, It's a bit of slander now. Let's put something against his name. Verse 5. And then sent Sanballat his servant unto me in like manner the 5th time. So they've asked him 4 times. This time's the 5th, with an open letter in his hand. That means it wasn't sealed. Often they would be sealed in a bag, and it goes to the governor. So it's private. The messenger would carry it, and they would have no idea. This time it's open. Oh, I wonder what that's all about. So they could read it. Oh, it's saying this. Oh. And then, you can see how slander, rumours, or this. Verse 6, wherein was written, and look what he's put, it is reported among the heathen, and Geshem saith. So this has got some substantial to it. Somebody else is saying this as well. It's not just me writing the letter, Sanballat, that thou and the Jews think to rebel. For which cause thou buildest the wall, that thou mayest be their king, according to these words. So did you know? I read the letter and it said the Jews are going to rebel and Nehemiah intends to be king. And you can see how the false claims, you can see, is that really what it's about? Gossip would get around and slander would get around and it would just permeate, wouldn't it? And verse 7, and thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of thee at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah. And now shall it be reported to the king according to these words. Come now, therefore, let us take counsel together. The 5th time they're putting pressure on. Look, this is the rumour. Is it true or not? So come down and talk to us. Yeah? That's what they were doing, weren't they? In that open letter. Look, everybody's now knowing about it. This is no longer private between me and you. They're now slandering the name of Nehemiah through propaganda, falsely accusing him. And this was going to be reported to the king of Persia unless they met. That's really like blackmail, isn't it? You come to us, otherwise the king's going to find out. And you're the cupbearer and you're the governor. What does he do? Well, his answer is in verse 8 and 9. Then I sent unto them, saying, there are no such things done as thou sayest, but thou feignest them out of thine own heart. Straight talking, denounces it. Doesn't let it rumble on. Is it true? Is it not true? He says it's not true. So he stands up against the false claims. And he prays. And for they all made us afraid, saying their hands shall be weakened from the work, that it be not done. Now, therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. Prayer again, isn't it? Yeah? He does what he can, but he prays about it, acknowledging that God is there. Acknowledging that God is there to help him. And so they then have a proposition. Well, if we don't get in that way, let's try a different way. We're going to hire somebody, yeah? We're going to go through the back door. We're going to get one of his own to do some of our dirty work, if you like. Yeah, proposition to deal inappropriately to save yourself. Verse 10. Afterward, I came into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delilah, the son of Mehetabel, who was shut up, and he said to me, let us meet together in the house of God, within the temple, and let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay thee. Yea, in the night they will come to slay thee. So there's the proposition. Look, Nehemiah, things are getting tough. I've heard there's an assassination plot. And if you're going to be protected and if you're going to be able to keep leading the people, you better come in the temple. That's probably the safest place. And we better go in and shut the doors, make sure nobody can get in. Yeah, because we don't want them to slay you. Whether you've got people there in the temple ready to assassinate him, we don't know. A bit like to go to the no, we don't know. But it's certainly saying coming into the temple, doesn't he? He tries to use that. He's now trying to frighten Nehemiah. Look, if you want to preserve your life, you better do this, is what he's saying. The fear of man, they're about to kill you, or the fear of God. This is the temple of God. And he was a Persian cupbearer in the court of the king. Most likely, therefore, a eunuch. I think that's indicated by his response. And the eunuch could not go, one was castrated, could not go in the temple. And he knew that. He knew the law of his God. And so they're challenging him now to compromise, isn't it? A proposal to inappropriately save himself. And he remains resolute. Verse 11. And he said, should such a man as I flee, who is there, that being as I am, would go into the temple to save his life, I will not go in. He says, I will not go in. He says, should a man like me run away, NIV. I don't think it's arrogant, It's not said, should a man like me run away? I don't think it's said like that at all. I think it was said like, should a man like me run away? I think it was said not as an arrogant, but a deep conviction that he was responsible as governor. And he wouldn't run from danger, wouldn't run for the role, and he would continue to trust in God. But I think, as I said, it's more than that. It is. Hopefully. They're playing on his own natural fears through a third party here, aren't they? They're using somebody else to get to him. And he fears God's laws and will not compromise God's standards, I think is what's being said here very clearly. That as a man as I am would go into the temple to save his life. He realises that he could not go into the temple. The RSV says, what man such as I could go in the temple and live? He does not forget his position before God, that under the law could not enter the temple. Deuteronomy 23 verse 1. So to do that would mean death anyway, because he would compromise what God had decreed in his laws. And so he faces that challenge. They desire to engineer, to find, can we stick something on this man, as it were, to try and remove him. Yeah, he goes on to perceive that it was a plot to slander him, to use his own personal fear, to then ultimately to remove his leadership. Verse 12, and lo, I perceived that God had not sent him. So he wasn't from God, as he claimed to be, but actually he saw through the matter because of what he said. It wasn't true. It wasn't in accordance with what God's will was it? Went against his principles. But that he pronounced his prophecy against me, for Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. And therefore was he hired, that I should be afraid. There you go. That was the purpose, to make him fearful for his own life. And do so in sin. Hence me saying about the eunuch and that element. That they might have an evil matter for an evil reproach. That they might reproach me, an evil report. That they might reproach me. So you saw that if he did it, whether he was assassinated there, I don't know. But if he did it, then there would be a charge. Well, hang on, your governor's gone in there, your law says this, and it would lead to him compromising his position as a godly leader. And therefore, he would probably be put in fear of his life through that anyway. Because the truth came out of what he'd done to preserve his own skin against the principles of God. And therefore, they were trying to use that. They were trying to make him compromise his standards. And there are lessons there for us, aren't there, on all these things. Lessons we can see straight away for our ecclesial life, lessons that have been there for the brotherhood, lessons for each one of us individually, that those challenges come to us externally, don't they? And now we want to consider the internal challenges. We came to Nehemiah as governor, leading God's people, how he dealt with those challenges in establishing the Ecclesia, in protecting the Ecclesia, and maintaining the Ecclesia. The purity of the worship and praise of God. So again, we can apply it to ourselves in the house of God. So looking now at internal challenges. And how did he overcome them? So we can apply the lessons to ourselves. Well, let's go back. We're going through the whole book. And we know this one, don't we? The ruined state of the city of God. We've mentioned it a few times now. I'm not going to read it, you know it. But isn't it beautiful how he associates with the problem? He doesn't come and say, well, you have a problem here and I'm going to help you out. It's like the prayer of Daniel and other great prayers and men. And he associates with the problem, doesn't he? And he encourages them how God's with them. Look at verse 17. This is after he's assessed it. Then said I unto them, ye see the distress that we are in. How Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. He's associating with the problem, isn't he? He doesn't say, well, you know, I've come to help you. Yes, he has, but he associates with them. We, us. He was a fellow Jew. This is his problem as well. And he associates with them, and then he encourages them, as we see in verse 18, that the hand of my God was good upon me. And so with God's will was working with him. He wasn't appointed by God to do this. God used his desire and used them to work out his purpose. And so therefore he carries it out, doesn't he? He responds, and they all respond, let us rise up and build. So he encourages. Then there's conflict due to oppression and status in society. You know, that came into the Ecclesia and caused difficulties for him. Chapter 5 of Nehemiah. So they've been building, and we know that they've half done the wall. Verse 6 of chapter 4, hopefully getting that familiar now as a marker in the timeline, as it were. Chapter 5 now, verse 1, look at this. And there was a great cry, in other versions say shriek of the people, and of their wives against their brethren the Jews. Not the outsiders, this is your fellow brethren and sisters, crying and shrieking about other brethren and sisters. Why? Verse 3. Some also said there were that they said, we have mortgaged our lands, our vineyards, our houses, that we may buy corn because of the great dearth. Basically, they've mortgaged themselves up to the hilt because there's a famine, and that they were finding it really hard, therefore, as verse 4 tells us, they got the tribute money to the king to pay, and verse 5, they'd actually given themselves as slaves to pay for all this. And there was no redemption possible. It says at the end of verse 5, neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and our vineyards and themselves. Verse 6, there was a very great cry. He heard these words. You know, there's great conflict here. There's great anguish. They were raising money through mortgaging their property, the land, to buy food. They were working. They weren't growing their food. They were buying it. There was a famine. We learned from verse 4 they had to get that tribute. And the rich Jews had lent them money, but it was with usury. And with that, they were unable to pay it back. So they were caught in that debt. Yeah, we hear about that today, don't we? People are caught in debt and unable to get out, trapped. And these were trapped. And this was by their fellow brethren. These were with those that were working on the same wall as them. Yeah? Or some of them weren't working, as we saw, but some would be. Look at his reaction. There's a time for righteous anger, brothers and sisters. Our Lord did it. Nehemiah did it. And there's time for us sometimes to do it. Verse 6. And I was very angry when I heard their cry in these words. And then I consulted with myself and rebuked the nobles. Just stop there. Then I consulted. My mind says, my heart consulted to me, or in me. Yeah? He's very angry. He hears something he knows that is just not right. And he has an emotional response to it. And he's charged up, and he's feeling this, and it's just not right, and I'm going to... No, he just stops, and he says we note his emotional reaction, and he consults with himself. There was a time of personal reflection. He didn't charge in there, right, I'm going to sort it out. He's angry, he's emotionally charged, and he just reflects, doesn't he? He consults his heart. Am I right feeling this? Is this right, what I'm about, that I'm thinking this? About the cry, is it, the situation? Because sometimes we can get that emotional, and then we just charge in, and we're going to make the situation worse. He doesn't do that, does he? He consults with himself. I consulted with myself. A time of personal reflection, time of meditation, time to take 10, Don't do the knee-jerk reaction, but do a calculated, reasoned response. Still in anger, still righteous anger, that this shouldn't be, brethren and sisters, but it is, and I'm going to deal with it, but in that calculated way, so it's not done to inflame the situation. And there's lessons there for ourselves, isn't it? Yeah? And then he gets them to solve, or to deal with the issue. So we carry on. He says, I consulted with myself, I rebuked the nobles and the rulers and said unto them, so he didn't change him, rebuking them, dealing with them, righteous anger, in that sense, ye exact usury, every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. And then he goes to talk to them about his own example and how that he had helped to redeem. And there they were, causing others to be sold into slavery, and he's trying to buy back the Jews from those around that have been sold into slavery. And as a leader, he's doing his part, and therefore he expects them to follow them to follow his part. And so, verse 11, their consciences are pricked, aren't they? Restore, I pray you, to them this day their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, their houses, and all the 100th part of the money, and of the corn and wine and oil that ye exact of them. Verse 12, and they said, then said they, we will restore them, and require nothing of them. So will we do as thou sayest. And then he makes sure that they do that before God, that that is confirmed, that they promise to do that. So he has righteous anger, he has personal reflection, then he has a meeting, and he controlled, rebuked, leads to that harmony. He restores it, doesn't he? Yeah, so some powerful lessons there in dealing with that agitation, that injustice amongst his brethren. And obviously lessons for ourselves, and as I say, he didn't take what he should have had himself. Verse 14 tells us, I, my brethren, had not eaten the bread of the governor, so he didn't take advantage. What other challenges did he overcome, brethren and sisters, in building this wall with his brethren and sisters? Well, there's this one, isn't it? Loyalty to family that was causing a bias and a very close monitoring. It's actually a spy network that was working at the same time as all this was going on. Chapter 6, verse 17 and 18, we see it there. Moreover, in those days the nobles of Judah sent many letters unto Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came unto them. So there's an open communication going between them, his fellow brethren, the nobles of Judah, and the enemy, Tobiah. This is happening and that's happening, and it's going backwards and forwards. Not only that, it says, for there were many in Judah sworn unto him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Ara, and his son Johanan, and taken the daughter of Meshullam, and the son of Berechiah, and they had reported his good deeds before me. Oh, Tobiah's done this, or Tobiah's doing that, or Tobiah... and uttered my words to him. Nehemiah says this, Nehemiah's done that, Nehemiah intends. It was a two-way, hence a spy network. They were telling the enemy what Nehemiah was thinking and what he was planning to do. My words, my matters, as Margin says. And Tobiah sent letters to put me in fear. So he's using this to try and get the fear of man. As we said, as a theme, the fear of God is greater. And he's doing this. There's treason, I called it, I think, in the other one, because they are not loyal to truth, they are loyal to family connections. That's what I put there, loyalty to family. And what does Nehemiah do? He ignores it, and he's not intimidated by it. Yeah? Might have been guarded, careful what he said, because obviously he knew it was going to get back, but he was not intimidated by it. The spy network that was put there. Didn't let the family influence of his brethren change his stance, weaken his resolve, but he kept with it, didn't he? Did not let Tobiah's attempts to intimidate or weaken his trust in God, whom he feared more. And he didn't let his brethren and their connections influence his perception of his work and the importance of it. Some very powerful lessons there, isn't there? And then the people were despondent at their sinfulness. We've seen this, we're going to spend a long time on this because we spent more time of this in this morning's studies, didn't we? When there was a great cry, when they wept, when they realised their sinfulness. And we note, didn't we, in chapter 8, how it was Nehemiah, verse 9, that was there with Ezra, both of them telling them this day is holy, that they were to, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. He was there with Ezra. It's the only point in the chapter I can see where he speaks, indicating his great encouragement to them to be separate and rejoice in God. And we also saw this morning the lack of spiritual leadership. Verse 13, the fact that the fathers, the chief of the fathers, the priests, the Levites, come unto Ezra to understand the words of the law, indicates they didn't understand it, or they didn't feel they were qualified enough to instruct and therefore they came to be instructed, so they might instruct, which tells us that there was a lack of spiritual leadership, and therefore they desired to improve that, and therefore they came to Ezra to learn of his wisdom, to learn of his understanding, that they might build up others. And obviously, there's lessons there for ourselves, isn't it? You can see the lessons straight away for ourselves, individually and ecclesially. What else did he have to deal with? Well, the covenant was not known and kept. Chapter 9 and verse 38. Chapter 9 is about the history of the covenant between God and Israel, and then their confession of their failings to keep that covenant. And we see in verse 38 what they say. And because of all of this, we will make a sure covenant and write it, and our princes, Levites and priests seal unto it. So they're going to rededicate themselves to this covenant because they've realized their waywardness as a nation. And we notice, don't we, in the sealing of that covenant, verse 1 of chapter 10, and now those that sealed were Nehemiah. There he is, top of the list, leading by example, the governor. Puts his stamp on it. And it's followed by then the others as it goes down here, yeah? Other key individuals, the priests, etc. They put their stamp to it to say, yes, we agree. And we saw that this morning. Yes, we're going to do this. Yes, we'll do this. Yes, we'll do this. Unfortunately, in time, we know that they did not keep to that. But their intention here was that they would. And Nehemiah leads by example in renewing that covenant. He didn't say, well, that's for you people, not for me, or I'm already renewed my covenant personally. No, he's there with the Ecclesia, leading the Ecclesia, helping the Ecclesia in their rededication to God. Surely it's a clear example, isn't it, of leading by example. It comes out time and time again. What he expected from others, he had to be prepared to do himself. And that's what he did. And then there was the organisation for the thanks and the worship of God in chapter 12. As a leader, he had to do that. We see in chapter 12, we know this is the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem. There were many gathered from the surrounding countries. We know that from verse 27. And the whole area and the villages thereof, just as an example. And from outside, the Levites, the singers, the priests, they all came. And the great ceremony of thanksgiving is held on this occasion. And we can see that how he made plans for this to be a regular occurrence in chapter 12. Verse 31, you've probably scanned and seen it already. Then I brought up the princes of Judah upon the wall and appointed 2 great companies of them that gave thanks. Whereof one went the right hand upon the wall toward the dung gate, and after them went, etc. And then the others go the other way, don't they? The other company, referred to in verse 38, and off they go. So he takes responsibility to organise this, to appoint the setting up of a system of worship. You know, verse 44, we see there, if you look through that, how it's very clear that he sets up this system that the worship of God may continue. The organisation of it, the detail of it, you know, that facilitates the people worshipping their God and keeping with that. That which should have been there. And we see how, we saw this really quite a lot this morning, didn't we? The friendship with the world corrupting the Ecclesia. Right at the top with Elisha, high priest. And he's so upset about this compromise, you know, that he deals with it. We've looked at it before, but let's just have a look at it from a slightly different angle. Chapter 13 and verse 4 then. We have the detail that God, of how he was over the chamber of God, Elisha, that he was allied unto Tobiah, the leader of the opposition, a Gentile, through connections, being in this place in Jerusalem within the temple itself, therefore indicating there was too much reliance on Nehemiah's leadership. When Nehemiah was there, things went really well. Then when he went away, things deteriorated. Like Joash led on Jehoiada. When Jehoiada went, then he turned away, didn't he? Yeah? And sometimes if you've been brought up in the truth, you can have elders, you can have brethren that you really look up to, and you lean on. And as you get older, you have to stop leaning on them and you have to stand on your own 2 feet. Sometimes that's because you move away from that ecclesia. Or sometimes they might be fall on sleep. And suddenly the person you lean on or the person you look to or want to get the answer from is no longer there. And you've got to think it out yourself, brother or sister. You've got to stand on your own 2 feet. Not be reliant on Nehemiah. That's what they were. The people were reliant upon him. And here he finds this friendship, doesn't he? He throws out the compromising practice. We didn't actually look at his reaction, so let's have a look. This is through how he reacted. to this situation. Verse 7, I came to Jerusalem and understood the evil that Elisha did for Tobiah. So he sees it as an evil. He perceives what it means for him to have that chamber and the consequences, the implications. It's an evil that Elisha did for Tobiah in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me sore. It grieved him sore. This isn't right. And therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber. Yes, he might be related to the high priest. Yes, he might be related to those that are loyal to him and Tobiah. But I don't care. Out it goes. And he throws it out, doesn't he? And therefore he takes drastic action. You can think of Christ throwing out the money chain. There's no overturning. There's a parallel there. So many parallels with our Lord, obviously. Very clearly here, cast forth. He was not afraid of upsetting Tobiah, was he? Otherwise he wouldn't do it. You think, oh, well, I can't do that. It might upset him. It might upset Elisha. No, he did it. He was wrong and he took action. He was not a respecter of persons. He was prepared to take the consequences. He was prepared to have changes in relationships with those people of what he'd done. And he was prepared to take the reaction from others in cleansing the temple because he feared God more than man. And he was not a respecter of persons. Very powerful lesson for there, and that's why he does it. Throws out the compromising practice. He will not compromise the standards of God. And he's upset that they had done it. Responsibility is not being upheld in the Ecclesia. Chapter 12, verse 10, we saw that, and how that the Levites weren't doing what they should have been doing. We saw the reasons why this morning, because people weren't bringing the tithes. That was the issue. And he reprimands the leaders in a meeting. He reminds them of their responsibilities to uphold the worship of God. And we saw that the reaction of that allowed that to occur. I like this idea of where we have in verse 11, I contended. Verse 11, I contended with the rulers. What does that mean, to contend? Contend for the faith, Jude, is it that? The idea of contend, when I looked it up, means remands, rebukes, confronts. I confronted the leaders with the challenging question. I reminded them. I rebuked them. He asks that challenging question that causes them to reflect about their behaviour. Why is the house of God forsaken? He didn't duck the issue. He didn't miss the opportunity. He didn't think, well, I can't ask them now, I'll just wait for a better time. He didn't justify it. He took the issue on. He didn't duck it. He asked the question that was awkward, that would lead to certain reactions. But he asked it, didn't he? And the fact they were unable to answer the question tells us that he asked the right question that went to the nub of the problem. To the heart of the matter. And then he gathers them together, verse 11. He gathered them together and set them in their place. And it says there, in their standing. And then that causes them then to have that reaction, that pricked in their hearts, to resolve the situation. Nehemiah took action. He saw the responsibilities were fulfilled. He himself, as we saw earlier in verse 9, earlier on today, cleansed the chambers and brought in certain things. He led by example, giving what he could as the governor, having reprimanded the leaders. What other internal challenges? Well, this one. Business being permitted into the Ecclesia. We saw that with the idea of the Sabbath, wasn't it? And he reprimands those responsible and uses his authority to prevent it. Really clear here. This Sabbath day, doing extra business for the Lord. We saw that in verse 15, 16 this morning. Then verse 17, I contended. There it is again with the nobles of Judah. What evil thing is this that you do and profane the Sabbath day? And so he uses his authority. Verse 19. It came to pass when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut and charged that they should not be open till the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates that there should not be no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day. So he takes charge. He uses his position to stop the business in the Ecclesia. In verse 20 we see the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodge once or twice. And what does he do with them? Verse 21, then I testified against them and said unto them, why lodge ye about the wall? If you do so again, I'll lay hands on you. This is pretty strong language, isn't it? Here's an older Nehemiah here. This is a Nehemiah that's not afraid, Sometimes older brethren can say things because they've got the age, the experience, and the respect, and it goes down far better than a younger brother saying the same thing. And here's an older Nehemiah, an older governor. He's been through with this people. He's helped these people. They've rebuilt the walls with him. He comes back and he finds these issues, and he deals with them, and he deals with these merchants, doesn't he? Don't you dare come back. And they didn't come back. So they didn't come back after that point, did they? He made sure it didn't happen. And he uses his authority. And so, what are the challenges? Well, we saw this, didn't we? Marriage with unbelievers. Those who despise the Lord and his people. And he's very passionate about this. He saw what this would lead to. He saw what this would cause. Very strong was his reaction. We find it difficult, don't we? To pluck out the hair and smite people. We think, because we're very westernized, But such was his strong feeling for this. He passionately responds and tells them they should make their allegiance to their God. He says that in verse 25, doesn't he? We saw that, we read it together. And he quotes Solomon. Look, Solomon, that godly king, the son of David. The women caused him to fail. Those marriages to strange wives. It says that in verse 26 and 27. And then he takes one of those who was supposed to be leading the people in the worship of God, and he drives them out, doesn't he? Verse 28 there, we saw there. The sons of Jehoiada, the son of Elishib, the high priest, was the son-in-law to Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I chased him from me. Got rid of him. He says, you go. Because here was a man that was supposed to be an example of separateness, of holiness to the Lord, of the priesthood. And there he was compromising through that marriage. And he got rid of him. He banishes him. And he upholds the principle of separation. And so, brothers and sisters, we've seen a lot of lessons there. We've seen a lot of, hopefully, external challenges and solutions, internal challenges and solutions that Nehemiah did with his day, with his ecclesia, that we can apply to ourselves in the action of building our ecclesias, in the action of separating ourselves as ecclesias, as individuals from this world, and of leading God's people, whether leading God's people in your own home or in your ecclesia or in the brotherhood. How more than ever we need to lead by example, brothers and sisters. We encourage one another when we do these things, don't we? Encouraging them to fear God more than man. Remembering that great lesson, we pray about issues, then we do what we can. Not do what we can and then pray. So that as a result, Nehemiah's prayer, and it's a wonderful Nehemiah's prayer at the end, may be our prayer as well. Which is, I've summarised it here, remember me, O my God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God, and for the offices thereof, and spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy. Remember me, O my God, for good.